All right, very good morning, students. I hope you're all very excited to learn more about proteomics. And you have seen like how many developments are happening in the field of proteomics, especially the Human Proteome Project and other initiatives of HPP from the biology and disease-driven and chromosome-centric projects. All of those are really going to change the landscape, the way we have been seeing the diseases in a very limited way. Now, by applying these type of high throughput approaches and technologies, our landscape, our views are totally changing of the diseases, and now we can see in much more comprehensive manner what is happening in any given type of life science system or biological system. So for doing that, quantitative proteomics becomes very important, and there could be different ways of doing quantitative work using gel-based or gel-free or label-free biosensors. Right now, we are primarily focusing on the label-free and label-based mass spectrometry-based approaches. And as in the previous lecture, you have already started seeing that the mass spec data, especially quantitative data, could be analyzed using different other open access softwares, and especially MetaboAnalyst was introduced to you. Today we'll continue in that light and also introduce you to a new software which will be Perseus. So some instructions and demos will be given of that. However, we understand that you will need some time to download that particular software package and install that in your system and go through that. So today's exercise is still going to be on the MetaboAnalyst only, like what you did last time, but a new data file will be assigned to you. And quiz will be based on the MetaboAnalyst and few concepts which we have been discussing about label-based, label-free quantitative proteomics in the previous and today's lecture. So just to recap, we have started talking about the growing field of proteomics, especially driven by mass spectrometry now, some of the concepts of protein identification and quantification and secondary data analysis, which is going to lead us towards understanding the biological system in subsequent lectures. So we talked about possibilities of doing quantification using two methods, either labeling the peptides or using the label-free approach. Label-free approach, as we discussed in the last class, have more advantages because it could avoid all kind of labeling, extra label or chemical reaction which you're going to do on the peptides. That could be avoided. And at the same time, it is also going to be very much cheap and very efficient because you're generating the databases and libraries of each sample differently. The quantification of that is still very challenging because this is something relies a lot about the inherent properties of these peptides and the reproducibility of the chromatography. That's where there is still slightly catch here, that how much confident we are about the quantification fold changes. And indirect usage of peak intensities or the spectral counts of peptides are currently being used as a way to identify the quantification or the fold changes. Label based are based on some metabolic or chemical labeling methods. Since you are labeling those tags and you are trying to monitor those tags in the reactions, your quantification becomes slightly more confident. Nevertheless, let me tell you one thing, that whether you do label free or label based, the number of protein which you identify after these experiments, you cannot just directly publish that work. You have to do many validation experiments, and those validation is going to be very critical for taking your leads forward and understanding the biological system in that way, right? All right, so let's have a quick chat about things so far. Especially we talked about quantitative proteomics and label-free proteomics. If you have any comments, questions, any points to make so far, and especially thinking about the broad aspect of labeling strategies versus label-free, I think all of these are very important points to keep in mind. So if you have any questions, let's talk now. How do you feel like, in terms of validation experiments, what is your experience or reading so far, that how to validate your findings from proteomics? Let's say you are doing this type of mass spec based work and you are doing some quantification using the label free method, or even today I'm going to talk more about label based methods. So my question to you is that what can be your strategies of validating your protein hits or protein leads from these experiments? Of course, I'm open to both, to take your questions as well as to take answers of my questions. So please, I saw some hands raised. Aparna, you want to say something, or Anjali? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, good morning, sir. Sir,
Good morning.
actually, I just wanted to ask some question that is there any parameter where we have to use label free or label based? Like how differentiate what we want to use, or is it because of the cost and every other features that we are using one of both?
Your voice slightly broke in between. If I understood you correctly, you are asking that what could be our considerations for choosing when to go for label based and when to go for label free. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, sir. Yes,
Right.
sir.
So this is actually an important topic, and I think from this course, one thing which I want all the students to take forward is also the thought process of designing the experiment, because that becomes very crucial. Many times, people who are not expert or understanding the field of proteomics, they feel like this is like an PCR instrument or NGS instrument. You bring your sample and do the analysis, and you should get data. But that's not the case. There is so much variables here, and lot of experimental considerations, experimental design is required. So your question is very interesting and valid, that we have to think about when to go for which strategy. And that can only come with more experience as we go along. So for instance, as I just mentioned, that protein quantification could be like the fold change of control versus treatment can be much more powerful if you are going to use the labeling strategy, because labels are going to bind strongly with the peptides, what you have prepared, and then you are going to look at the fold change of those tags intensities from the control versus your disease condition, for example. So your quantification values or the fold changes can be more reliable. So that's one advantage of using label based strategies. However, the challenges are that labels are costly, as well as labeling is also going to alter the protein and modify that. So therefore, it's going to be also challenging to always label the peptides and proteins. Uh, but if you are doing, let's say, a very controlled experiment, you are using a bacterial culture, yeast culture, or experiment which you on a cell line, which you are giving the drug treatment, and you just want to have three replicates, three controls, and three treatments. For something like that, I think label-based strategies might be better, because you have a very simple experiment, very controlled experiment. Things are very, kind of closely monitored, and you can really get very confident, reliable quantification data, because the experiments will be done in a very shorter interval as well. Now think about the situation of the real type of problems of clinical issues or any other biological project which you are doing, which is going to require sample collection over the time period of over the months. So now, if we are working on the clinical problems like some plasma samples of some patients or tumor tissue of patients or any other sample type, or even sometimes you are doing the culture-based studies which will go through multiple rounds and you have to collect the samples over the time period, I think then your sample collection and storage also becomes problem, because when you store the samples, sample will start getting some degradation. Or even if you do the protein extraction right away, and you are going to wait for 6 months time for all the samples to be labeled, again that will be a problem, because you have collected one sample today, one after 2 months time, and another set of samples after 6 months time. So now what you are getting a variety of samples over the time period, and some of them will start showing degradation. So now if you want to do quantitative proteomics, you want to label everything at the same time. So for the labeling, now some samples already have different type of degradation or different changes have already happened. So for the clinical sample type, it may be quite tedious to actually think about a lot of stored samples and analyzing all of them together after 6 months or 1 year time. So therefore, in that situation, label free can be much powerful, because you collect some set of samples today, and within a week you can prepare the protein and peptide samples. You can digest those, prepare those, and store those peptide, right peptide in -80. So now that can be very robust and very stable. Now you get another set of samples after 2 months time, and you do the same thing. And likewise, and you can keep actually acquiring data as well. You don't have to store everything. You can, after preparing the sample, you can also acquire the mass spec data and store that data as a patient specific data in a database form. Now, as you go along, you have now 100 patient data set, which you can now analyze whenever you want, or even after 50 sample you want to analyze, you can analyze the data. So you get a lot of flexibility of analyzing the data or reanalyzing the data in different manner with the label-free data. And also the data, when you are acquiring it right away, you are not going to wait for the any issues with the sample storage and sample collection problems, and you can actually generate so much patient-specific libraries and databases. So I hope that gives you some context that where you can take a call. Also,
Yes,
as I mentioned, that both of these experiments, whether we do label-based or label-free, is going to give you still large number of differentially expressed peptides and proteins. So that is going to still pose challenge in front of you. Which among these could be a good biomarker? Which among these is the right target which I want to take to my next experiment, and I want to focus my PhD or my MTech project just based on that lead. So that's again challenge. So now my question to all of you was, which I hope you have started thinking about it, how to validate your targets. Like, do you have any experience or thoughts that now you identified some proteins from either label based or label free, how to validate your leads? Aparna, you want to answer that, or you have any other question?
I had a related question. Like how
Yes.
do we decide what exactly you want to label? Because we need to have some idea what is in the sample exactly to label it.
Can you repeat your question? Your voice was slightly weak in the beginning.
Uh, just a minute. Is it better now?
Better now.
Okay, so I wanted to ask, like, how do we decide what is exactly that we are labeling in the sample? We want to label proteins, but there will be many peptides of different proteins, so we need to have some idea about it already to label it.
That's right. So that's what the proteomics says, right? In a given complex sample, and let me give you a very interesting example, which all of you are right now aware of, nasopharyngeal swab sample, right, from our nose, which is being used for RT-PCR testing of COVID-19, right? That's very interesting sample. Like, this is human respiratory specimen. So when they are, collecting the sample from these swab and put in the VTM tube, which is viral transport medium tube, and idea is over there to, to collect this sample. And if there is a virus there, they want to preserve that virus with the mRNA of the virus, so that that can be extracted and you can do the cDNA and you can go for the real-time PCR analysis. Now we do the same sample, whatever is the available sample from the VTM, and we do proteomics from that. So we first want to prepare the protein extract, protein samples from this specimen, which is also being used for the real-time PCR, and leftover we are using it. And then we want to analyze the data. Think about such an interesting sample where you have the human proteins predominantly, it's coming from human. You may also have viral proteins, right? Because that's what virus is infecting, and we want to test if there any viral protein or peptides are there. And additionally, in our environment, there is so much bacteria and pathogen like fungus and other pathogens are there. We have also seen many cases of mucormycosis and other type of fungal infections happening in the COVID-19 patients. So again, it is possible that now you have ecosystem of human proteins, viral protein, and some fungal proteins, all of that in the same sample. So when we extract the protein from this nasopharyngeal swab sample, we are actually obtaining all of these three type of proteins, right? One is the host proteins, second is the viral, and third is other pathogenic proteins. So now when you digest all that, you are going to get the mixture of everything. You will have all, sometime bacteria, sometime you will have the, virus, sometime you will have the fungus, as well as, of course, the humongous of the human proteins are there. So then you have to search against databases. That's where databases becomes very important here. That concept will also come in some time, that how to utilize the databases, because you got so many peptide coming from different species, but finally it all depends on what is the referent database against which you are searching your data. So if you search the same data with against only human database, you are only going to look for the human proteins. If you search against only SARS-CoV-2, you'll only find anything specific to SARS-CoV-2. So therefore, you can always think about what should be your database for searching these peptides. So peptide searching is going to be always dependent upon the databases. Now your question had two components to it. One component was labeling aspect of it. Second was the searching aspect of it. Searching aspect, I hope I have answered already, that it is all depends upon that what is our reference database against which we are searching our crude data set. So data set is all peptide sequences, that's all. And at the end, what you are going to look at, you're going to look at how best I can try to see at least more than 2 unique peptides, which are more than 7 or 9 amino acid long, whether they are matching to a given protein of virus or human or any other pathogen. So that will be the search criteria. That's what your softwares were doing with the Mascot and with the MaxQuant. But additionally, when you say peptide labeling part, labeling depends on different chemistry. Like you need to know that how a peptide and your label is going to bind. And that's where different type of labeling strategies have come forward. And that is going to be the talk of my day, like for the lectures I'm going to talk today shortly, is essentially different labeling strategies and labeling reactions. So that I'm sure will be covered shortly, so that you have to just wait a couple of minutes more. Can I take a couple of very quick answers about your validation strategies? What type of validation strategies you have used in so far in your experiments, or you might have read about it? Anyone? I'm sure you know those names. Name of some techniques. If I'll give you answer, then you will say that you already know that. I hope you've heard about Western blots.
Hello?
Yes.
So this is Diti Priya.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, so I have used Western blot for like as a validation technique after carrying out the proteomics analysis to find out if a particular protein that I have like I've got a hit of that protein after in the analysis of proteomics, and I've used that to see through Western blot if it is actually changing under the influence of a cytokine.
Very good. Yeah, this is a very traditional approach of using the mass spec and identifying the proteins, followed by going for Western blots to validate your protein. Also, some people might have used here ELISA, right? Yeah. To validate the levels of a given protein or antibody, you want to use ELISA. So these are different strategies. But why I am asking this question? Because I don't want you to use any of these ELISA or Western blot. Because in the mass spec, what you are getting is only peptide sequences, right? Mass spec is giving you not the complete sequence of a given protein, but only the stretch of peptide sequences. And those stretch of peptide sequences, you are taking at least more than 2 unique peptides, which you are going to blast, and you want to search what is that protein, right? So now in this case, in the label-free quantification, what you have done, you have generated the library of peptides, and you looking at the spectral count, you have found that there are some peptides which are showing higher abundance from my control versus disease condition. So therefore, all you have knowledge is about specific peptide sequences. That's all you know, right? So why not validate your findings at peptide itself, rather than raising an antibody against that protein or going for any indirect ways of validation? The very direct thing is from mass spec, you are identifying a set of peptide sequences. Why not validate the same set of peptide sequences using another mass spec or using more type of samples that could validate your finding? So this is actually comes under the field of targeted proteomics, which we will talk in subsequent lectures. But I brought this discussion in today's context because when you are doing LFQ, label-free quantification, you are actually generating the libraries as well, right? You are having every samples, you are having all the peptide sequences stored like in a box. This information can be very useful if you want to validate your targets later on using parallel reaction monitoring approach, which is one of the targeted proteomics approach, which again is not possible with the label-based approaches. When you are doing labeling, you are not generating the every sample specific libraries. Therefore, you are also going to lose that aspect of validation. You have to start from the identifying the peptides, and you have to develop more MRM assays for that. Whereas in this case, if you generate the libraries with LFQ or DIA methods, you can also use that way to validate your findings with the PRM level. This will be discussed again as we go along, but I just wanted to give you the broader perspective that why some of these techniques which we are discussing, and we want to evaluate that why they are better or they could be better in a given context. So I hope you are agreeing now that label-free quantification offers many advantages. But at the same time, if you still have good money and good funds available and a very controlled experiment, you can at least try out in the beginning at the label-based strategies. So with this, let me continue on my lecture presentation part. and talk to you about labeling strategies. I briefly spoke to you that there could be different ways of in vitro and in vivo labeling methods. And in vitro labeling methods are going to look at different strategies, either labeling of amino acids or looking at the peptide labeling at the N-terminal sequence or the C-terminal part. So let's take few only techniques here because we cannot talk about all of them. I'll just pick one of this amino acid based labeling and one of this the N-terminal peptide labeling. So ICAT or isotope coded affinity tag. This was one of the very first approach of showing that mass spectrometry can also be used for quantitative proteomics directly from the shotgun approach. Otherwise, earlier people used to do conventionally 2D gels or even dyes, which is the technology difference in the electrophoresis, where samples were labeled from Psi3 or Psi5 dyes, mixed together, run on one gel, and scan the image, and you get two images of Psi3, Psi5, and that can be used for quantification. So that was a dyes, 2D dyes based concept, which was quite attractive in 1990s or so, so 95 to 98 or 2000. During that time, that was the very attractive approach of doing quantitative proteomics. But this was first time when Steve Gagey and Rudy Uberstall, their team, they first time showed that you can label the peptides using different strategies, and then you can run them in the mass spec directly without separating them on the gel, and then you can still do the quantification. That became very important study, and this paper I will give you. You should read this paper, which was the first approach of showing directly mass spectrometry based approach could be used for the labeling. So labeling strategies actually the concept came from the again 2D dyes only, because in 2D dyes people were using Psi3, Psi5 dyes, and specific amino acid residues like lysine or cysteine were chosen for those type of the dyes binding. So the same concept was actually taken, but it was taken to the mass spec level. Now here the thought was, can we take the proteins where there is a abundant cysteines are present, and I have this ICAT tag, whether this ICAT tag can bind to this particular cysteine residue in the given protein, and then the label could be made from that. So again, as I think Aparna, one of the student asked question, that different type of tagging strategies, right? So what you're looking at here, you are looking at a very innovative tags, which will have many information to convey for your quantitative protein experiment. So first of all, you need to have a chemical reactive group, right? This is the reactive group which is going to form the covalent bonding with your proteins or peptide. It's going to bind to that. And then you have a tag, which is a biotin tag in this case, which could be utilized for the affinity chromatography based purification, because you only want the labeled population. You do not want any other protein or peptide which is unlabeled. So this is going to help to screen the labeled population only, and this is going to help to bind to the proteins. This part in the middle is the linker chain, which is where you can have the light form of ICAT or heavy form of ICAT. Because we are doing quantitative proteomics, our aim is to compare control versus test. So let's say control sample, you are labeling with the light ICAT, and your disease sample you are labeling with the heavy ICAT. So these ICAT reagents became very important. One was based on deuterium, D8 ICAT, heavy ICAT, and other is the light ICAT, which is based on the hydrogen. So now this is the difference among these two ICAT reagents, and ICAT was targeting cysteine containing proteins. So still 80 to 85% of the proteome can be labeled using this strategy. Of course, you can't label 100%. And then after labeling, you can enrich your labeled peptides because you have the biotin. So if you pass through the streptavidin column, you can enrich the bound peptide, the peptide which are labeled. So this is the simple experimental scheme here. You have some control peptides and the disease peptides. You have labeled them with different type of ICAT labels. You mix them together. Now you affinity purify biotin and streptavidin interaction will happen, and only labeled peptide population can be enriched, which now you can take forward for the further identification and quantification. So this was based on two sample analysis only. Only 2 plex can be done with an ICAT reagent. Very similar concept like what could have been done with the 2D dyes at that time, that a Psi3 and Psi5 label, and likewise ICAT light or ICAT heavy, right? This can be done. But the processing of the sample after you have done the labeling, everything you mix up and you do everything together. And at the end, you are going to measure the abundance ratio of the heavy and light isotopic labels of these type of conditions. So you have one set of samples labeled with light form, other set of samples labeled with the heavy form, and you will see 8 atomic mass unit difference among those two. You're also generating MSMS spectra from that, so protein identification could also be performed. So this was actually, a quite attractive approach, as you can understand. Without processing your sample running on the gel, directly you are labeling your entire proteome sample of control versus disease conditions, mixing them together, running them in the mass spec, and not only you are able to quantify some proteins with confidence, but also you are able to identify every single protein, whatever you quantify. In the gels, the major problems are that even if you identify some very interesting, spot is showing up regulation or down regulation, after cutting the spots and doing in-gel digestion, you are not able to identify all of those proteins because peptides are very small quantity. And when you run in the mass spectrometer, you don't acquire all the time very good spectra. So therefore, something looks very interesting in the gels, but you may not be able to know what that protein is because you cannot identify them well. Therefore, the looking at the mass spec approach, you have 100% accuracy at the end. Whatever you have quantified, those peptide sequences, MSMS fragmentation. You can search in the databases, and you can at least know what that protein is. However, the limitations are still quite a few because it was only amino acid based labeling strategies. Proteins have to be rich in cysteine residue. ICAT reagent, as I showed you, three parts of that, binding domain with the proteins, the heavy or light regions, and the tag region for the biotin, for the protein purification. All of that made the overall tag very large, and therefore, when you are doing fragmentation, there was a possibility of it interfering with the mass spectral fragmentation, and therefore, to overcome that, the group came up with a new approach of cleavable ICAT, or known as CICAT, where now, in addition to having the same chemistry, there was a spacer group added with the 13 carbon atoms, which is 13 carbon atoms were added. So when you do fragmentation in the collision cell, then this particular part can come out, and overall, the ICAT reagent is not very large. So they tried to overcome that, but still the major bottleneck remained that it can only label 2 samples. So multiplexing is very limited. It's like, just additional approach of gel, but you are not able to offer something very drastically like 6 condition or 10 condition to be compared at the same time. So this actually was very important discovery, very important scientific work, which showed that mass spectrometry based shotgun proteomics and quantitative proteomics is possible. However, that led to opening of many new techniques, which includes the isotope coded protein labels, ICPL, or iTRAC or TMT. iTRAC stands for isobaric tagging for relative and absolute quantification, and TMT stands for tandem mass tag. Both of them are based on the isobaric labeling of peptides. And now we are not talking about a specific amino acid labeling, but we are going to talk about how to take the peptide sequence and terminal of the peptide sequence, and that will be used for labeling with the iTRAC reagents. So iTRAC reagent, these are a set of multiplexed amino specific, very stable isotopic reagents. These reagents can come in the 4 conditions or for the 8 different conditions. So you can at least label your 4 samples for 4-plex experiment or 10 or 8-plex experiment. TMT comes with the 2-plex, 6-plex, 10-plex, or now even 14-plex. So again, you can compare so many conditions same time. These peptides, when you are, you have every sample is individual sample. You are digesting the sample to make the peptides, labeling that peptide with a specific type of label. And after labeling has been achieved, then you mix them together and then run in the mass spec to do the protein identification and quantification. Advantage here is once you have labeled, they're all going to co-elute, whether you have the control or the treatment samples. And when you are doing the collision, which we talked in the tandem mass spec concept, collision induced association, then at that time, these labels, which is the reporter ions, they will then dissociate, and then they are going to show you the changes for the relative quantification of the proteins. So let's look into the tag, which is the iTRAC reagent, how this works. So again, you have 3 major components here. One part is the N-hydroxysuccinamide group, which is going to form the peptide reactive group. It's going to bind to the peptides. Other is the reporter-on, which is what you are going to use for your protein quantifications eventually, and that comes with the N-dimethyl piperazine ring, where it can be either total mass can be 114 or it can addition of more methyl groups, and total mass could be 115, 16, 117 Dalton as well. But because you want to make isobaric tags, you want to have overall mass same for your condition A, B, C, and D. So therefore, there is a balancer group there. If you have 117 here reporter group, then you have a balancer group carbonyl, which will be only 28 Dalton. If you have 114, then you will have 31. So that kind of a strategy is used for making sure that all the four conditions get same type of mass on the labels. So reporter ions are going to be utilized for your quantification, going to give you good B and Y ions. Balancer is making sure that your total overall mass remains 145 for all the ITRAC reactions. So in a typical experiment, let's say you are talking about 4-plex or 8-plex reaction, you have, let's say, this sample 1, 2, 3, 4 to be compared. You are adding 4 different type of ITRAC labels. So in the peptide labeling you are doing, this one let's term as a 114, 115, 116, 117. Whenever we have 114 label, a balancer group of 31 is being added, so that mass is 145. Likewise 115 and 30, 116, 29, 117, 28. Each one of those are going to give 145 only. Now after doing the labeling, you mix all of them together, run in the same tube, same reaction now in the liquid chromatography followed by MS and MS analysis, and you are going to look for how to look for the fragmentation pattern of those. So experiment is very straightforward. Once you have prepared your sample, digested the peptides, you can label each one of those, mix them together. If you want to get better coverage, you can also fractionate these samples, because you are actually taking the that sample, whatever is the complete proteome of that sample, and like that from 4 different samples you are taking, and after labeling you're mixing them all together. It's a very complex sample and huge number of peptides are there. It's good strategy, good thoughts to actually fractionate those to maybe 6 or 10 or 14 fractions, so that now each fraction when you run, you will get much larger coverage of the overall proteome. And since they're all labeled, everything will go together for that set of peptide conditions. So this is where I think some more differences can come in terms of your experimental plan, how you are planning for the overall experiment. Sometimes there's a lot of cost and the practical aspects are involved as well, because more and more sample you want to run, same sample you fraction to 10 fractions, and each fraction you want to run separately, it is going to cost some money for running each of the sample in the mass spec. And additionally, if you don't fractionate, you have to also then think about the overall coverage. Like coverage might be limited, maybe 70% or 60% as compared to what you can get after the fractionation. So you have to weigh off your options between the practical considerations versus an ideal experiment like that. Right? Let me show quickly the ITRAC experimental strategy, especially the labeling part until the experiments.
ITRAC technique. The protein samples to be analyzed are first digested with trypsin into some smaller peptide fragments. The trypsin cleaves the proteins at the C terminal of lysine and arginine residues, unless they are followed by a proline residue. The ITRAC reagent consists of a reporter group, a balanced portion, and a peptide reactive group that interacts with the N-terminus of the peptide or free amino group of lysine residues, giving an overall mass of 145. The reporter group used to label each peptide sample is unique, and the mass are varying between the 114 to 117, thereby enabling the labeling and quantification of up to 4 samples simultaneously. As you can see in these animations, in first one, the reporter group 117 and balancer group 28. In second sample, reporter group 116, balancer group 29. In third sample, reporter group 115 and balancer group 30. In fourth, the reporter group 114 and balancer group 31. Overall, 145 Galton. This method has now further been improved to allow labeling of 8 samples simultaneously, although we are just showing here the 4-plex experiment. The labeled samples can be pooled together The pooled samples are purified on a strong cation exchange column to remove any excess unbound I-track reagent. This facilitates the sample cleanup prior to further finer separation and purification using reverse-phased chromatography. Further purification of strong cation exchange purified samples is carried out by reverse phase liquid chromatography, wherein the sample is passed through a column containing a packed stationary phase matrix that selectively adsorbs only certain analyte samples. The eluted fractions are further characterized by MS. The purified labeled peptide fragments can be analyzed by MS-MS. The different masses of the reporter group allows the peptide fragments to be identified. The reporter group is lost during fragmentation step. The relative quantification of 4 samples or 8 samples can now be performed in this way. Once I-track experiment
All right, so I hope you got some visual feel of doing the experiment, different steps involved. Analysis could be done in different ways, different softwares which we are talking, so I skip that part now. But broadly, you have seen, like, you can easily now compare your 4 conditions or even their reagents available for I-track and TMT, where you can do even 8-plex or 10-plex reactions easily. And you can label all the conditions together. You are not adding any extra, difference of the mass, total 145 Dalton only. So therefore, you are not going to add any additional changes on the overall peptides of each condition. Combine all of them. If you want to enrich the labeled population, you can do the purification as well, and then run in the LC-MS for further quantification part. Now, what you will see in the data, like you have seen some chromatograms by now of the label-free experiments, but in the label-based experiments, I-track or TMT, each of these, when you look at the mass, if you click on that and look at their MS-MS spectra, then you can find out these are the reporter ions, like in this case 114, 15, 16, and 17 being labeled. And that labeling can be utilized for the quantification part of that. Therefore, you need a good fragmentation of each of these peaks from at the MS-MS level. So that brings a little bit more practicality of it, like, initially you have to optimize your experiments well, so that you know that your labeling was good. So it requires 2 different steps here. One is your chemical reaction which is happening. So your pH has to be very well maintained, your labeling conditions has to be properly done, so that your labeling efficiency is, if not 100%, very close to 100%, and you want to get the best sample which is labeled to the mass spec for run. But even at mass spec level, if the collision energy which is fragmenting this is not sufficient, you may not see the right type of reporter ions fragmented. So therefore, playing here with the collision energy becomes important. So I showed you some parameters in the beginning about how to change the parameters in the mass spec settings for the MS or MSMS analysis. So there are many things which you want to look over there, especially the resolution, the different type of scan range and all. But those, as I said, like those many things become the instrument specific and the type of technology which you are using. Nevertheless, collision energy is very important in whatever, whether you use QTOF or Orbitrap, you want to optimize that what is the best collision energy, which is going to give me this type of reporter ion patterns. So in this case, it is stepped collision energy being used till 32, and which is giving good eye-track spectra, and that can be utilized for the next set of reactions. So eye-track, as you can appreciate, as compared to ICAT, it is providing much more multiplexing capability. It can give you much more analytical precision because you are not looking at the specific amino acid, but rather peptide sequence labeling. Your coverage of proteome is going to be increased, and other bias which you have seen in the previous ICAT experiments could be eliminated. Nevertheless, you are still prone to certain errors because you are talking things at the proteome scale, right? Large number of proteins. So your efficiency of digestion, that is the first bottleneck, because you are going to assume that everything is going to be chopped down with the enzyme like trypsin. Your enzymatic efficiency becomes very important. Also, whether you want to fractionate your sample, how well you are able to fractionate those. Your labeling reaction, your labeling efficiency of that. Many of these things are all going to be quite challenging to get you the best possible result. Of course, you can be close to that, but still you have to keep many of these challenges in mind. Keep also in mind comparing about different, these labeling strategies like ICAT and iTrack. What type of changes are there? One is based on the amino acid labeling, one is based on the primary amine group labeling. It can go multiplexing of 4 or 8 plex. ICAT can only go for 2 samples. So therefore, many of the things are common, but still there are some advantages of one technique over other technique. A similar concept of what we just spoke is also seen in the TMT labeling, and TMT I spoke earlier as well briefly, where you have seen that, okay, 3 controls and 3 treatments, we are labeling with like iTrack, we are labeling with the TMT tags here, and TMT tags comes with a different number. So again, vendors make sure that, that one iTrack is labeled comes from the SciX company, and this comes from Thermo Fisher TMT. Concept are same, both are isobaric tagging, both are based on reporter ions. Only changes are the which type of reporter ions you are looking at, 114 to 117 there. Here you are looking at 126 to 131, that series. TMTs again have shown slightly higher overall lead in the quantitative proteomics because it can go easily from the 6-plex to 10-plex to 14-plex. But the concepts remain exactly the same. You have to still optimize your collision energy when you are looking for the fragmentation of that. So again, last time I showed you 32 was utilized for iTrack. In this case, for the 10-plex of TMT tag labeling experiment, 35 collision energy has worked well, and you can see all those reporter ions of TMT labeled peptides very well and in each of these conditions. So think about, our magnitude of quantifying things have become really changed. Now you are comparing 5 control and 5 treatment samples all at once. Or think about a very interesting biological experiment where you are growing a cell line and you are looking at the drug treatment, and you want to look at from the short-term changes to the long-term changes. You are taking some sample at 30 seconds, few minutes to hours, then couple of hours, then a day, and then few days, then week, and then like 2 weeks. All that could give you 10 or 14 conditions. Everything you can monitor in one single reaction and look for the temporal dynamics of the entire proteome, how it is changing, how it is modulated because of the drug which you have given to the cell, or because of the stress which you have induced to the cell, and because you are giving everything doing the reaction with one particular multiplexing, you are going to see much more reproducible data, right? So this very elegant way of thinking how to look at your complex data sets at the proteome scale by utilizing these type of multiplexing experiments. Concepts are very similar, whether we talked about iTrack or TMT. They both have the protein reactive groups, they have the balancer regions, they have the reporter ion groups. Same goes to TMT as well. Softwares are commercial, there are different types of softwares being used. In this case, Protein Pilot being used, in TMT, Proteome Discoverer being used. But now there are more and more open access softwares are coming, and MaxQuant has really become very important in that way, developed by Matthias Mann and other very key scientists who have worked on that. And then those softwares have come really well, which provides the ability to analyze TMT data or eye track data as well as the label-free data with the open access. So any one of you need not to have these type of commercial software which are very costly to do these type of analysis yourself. We will be giving you some data as well for practicing, which now you can go through the MaxQuant and take eye track or TMT data, which will provide you, and you can analyze yourself. You don't have to look for the commercial databases and the softwares. So I think this part we already had some questions which brought the context of discussing about label free versus label based. I'll very quickly just recap that label free is less costly because you're not buying those chemicals and not labeling. It is more powerful because every sample you are labeling, you're not labeling every sample, you're acquiring data individually. In label based, you are labeling those independently, then pulling them together. Study design can be very dynamic. You need not to worry about only these 10 samples you're going to do the experiment. You can keep adding more as you get, and then reanalyze the data based on different type of features which you have. I'll just give you one example. For example, we did a project on brain tumors, which is meningioma brain tumor, and idea was that let's say if we have 100 patients, of which 50 are grade 1 and 50 are grade 2. Now these gradings are done based on the histopathology information, microscopic observations, and different marker which they test for. So based on this, now we say these 50 samples are grade 1 and these 50 samples are grade 2. Now we have acquired data for all these 100 patients individually. Now later on we got an information that from among these 100 patients, when neurosurgeons, they have looked at the radiology data, 40 of them makes one pattern and 60 of them makes another pattern. Irrespective of their IHC data, which was the grading part, the radiological images looks similar somehow in 40 and looks different in 60. Now you want to reanalyze the data. So you got 100 patient data individually acquired, but now you can analyze that data either 50-50 based on the grade 1, grade 2, or 40-60 based on the your radiological observation. In this case, we are looking at a skull-based versus a supratentorial tumor type. Or one could now think about a different context. Now you have sequenced all of these 100 samples and you look for very specific mutation of TERT or NF2 gene. And now you want to say, this is the population which I'm going to look for. Among those, 30 are TERT negative and 70 are positive. Or likewise, NF2 mutation, there are 40 of them are negative and 60 of them are positive. What happens to based on these mutations? What happens to them at the proteome level change? So you can actually reanalyze the data in different contexts. Very dynamic study design analysis could be done. Here that flexibility is not there because you have come up with a thought, these are 50 grade 1, 50 grade 2, you have labeled them accordingly, you have mixed them together, you can only look at that data with that particular question which you have started with. I hope this gives you much open idea that why we are looking at the different strategies of analyzing your quantitative data. Analysis time is much longer because you have huge amount of files from each of these data. Here it is mixed. It's probably much better to analyze that data. But you can keep adding more and more sample as you go along in the future. You realize that when you're doing the mutant analysis, you got only 30 of the TERT negative, 70 of the TERT positive, but now you want to add some more of the TERT negative, 40 more of that. You can run more samples and now you have 70 TERT negatives and 70 TERT positive, those mutants. Again, you can reanalyze the entire data. So again, a lot of dynamic and flexibilities are there to do this type of analysis. Data analysis is still very challenging because we are hoping to see like everything is very reproducible as we go along, and there are different type of quality checks are there, which we will talk in subsequent class. But data analysis becomes much more robust and straightforward in this case here. So what we spoke today is essentially different type of labeling methods which we are discussing, and also the experimental context, which is very important, which strategy to choose. And I think some of your questions were really leading us to conclude this today's lecture, that why we need to choose those type of labeling strategies or not to choose them to label depending on the experiments. And there's so much innovation still going on, which I'm sure will catch up as we go along in the next lectures about data dependent acquisition as well as data independent acquisition based methods. So that's all right now from my side, from the theoretical aspect of the lectures. We are going to now have an exercise based on Perseus, which Avinash and the T is going to take and give you the demo of this. Today's quiz is not going to be based on Perseus, so you can relax a little bit. Just learn how to take the data forward for the Perseus. We are going to give you the data file as well, which you will analyze with some leisure, because some of you may have compatibility issue of Windows or Linux. Do that over the weekend. We will take a quiz based on the Perseus output file. So we are giving you the question paper in that way right now. You will do that over the weekend. Once you analyze the data, based on that data analysis, we will have some questions in the next class, in the quiz. But today we will still have a quiz which will be based on the Metabo Analyst. That will be like a repeat of the last class. Deep will give you a very quick recap of that, so that if you have missed out some parameter, you will be again refreshed on that. So Avinash, right now over to you for giving a quick overview of the Perseus software, and then Deep will refresh them on the Metabo Analyst, and then we move on to the today's quiz. That's all, everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So I'm sharing my screen. Hello. I've shared the link to all you download. So I hope you all have downloaded the link. So after downloading the link, you can just unwrap that zip file, and you will find an icon of Perseus, and you can, after that, clicking that icon, you can just go to the interface. So this is basically quite complex as compared to Metabo Analyst. So here you can do all the things. So here so there are divided into three parts. So first is the loading of your matrix. So the raw the files which are getting from the Maxcon. So Maxcon output file you can directly use there, and you can input there.
Avinash,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Could you please go a little slow?
Okay. Yeah. So
Thank you.
This part is yeah. Hello. Okay. Yeah. So this part is basically where you can all the the toolkit is here. So this basically processing part is here, and here you can analysis or visualization part. So you can check all the histograms and different volcano plot and matrix and the correlation matrix and ECA. All the visualization part is there. So here you can see the matrix in this part, and here you can see the workflow. So I'm just showing a normal demo to all of you how to do the analysis. So first we will upload our matrix. So this is a demo file for your matrix. So you can see that in the raw file there is too many columns are present. So we just need a few columns to do the analysis of this software. So for analysis, we generally need a LFQ intensity columns only, and there's a rest numerical columns and categorical columns and text where the protein ID is present. So we have to remove the sum of the parts which from our matrix. So like those things which are not required, we can remove just by selecting. And suppose we do not need a reserve peptide and unique sequence, the molecular weight, and also the intensity. So we can just select those parts, and further we can go that. Here also we do not need a measure ID, protein ID, and this kind of thing. So after that we can just click OK, and here you can see that all the matrix get uploaded, and you will find all the columns which you have selected. So matrix is generated. So as you first imputing your data in Metabo, and this first you have to clear all the contaminants, reverse files, and other files like a filtering process. So here you have to do all the filtering process. So for that, you can just go here in the filter raw, and here you can select the filter raw based on the categorical column. So here you can see that all the potential contaminants, reverse, and only identified by site. So this is basically negative score, and this is for reverse sequences, and this for potential contaminants. You have to remove all of three one by one. So just starting with the potential contaminants. Then I will again go to this here, and I will select the reverse sequences. So in each matrix, if you can see that, so in the previous matrix, there the contaminant sequences are there. So there is one column. So you can see there all the potential contaminants are here. Okay. So in the next column, you can see all the contaminants are removed. Okay, there is no contaminant. So similar way, we are removing all the reverse and negative score. So here we remove the reverse sequences, and after that we will remove the all the negative score by selecting this one. So now the filtering process is done. So after the filtering, we usually rename the columns if the name is different or.
Sir, excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, are you sharing the screen?
Yes, I'm sharing the screen.
but I cannot see that.
I think it's your network problem. So
It's
try to
visible, yeah.
reconnect. Yeah. So yeah, after that we can go for a renaming of a column. So just go to the category annotation, or if you want to change the name of the particular column, so by renaming a column, you can do that. So there is a different way to rename the column. So I'm just using this function based renaming thing. Okay, so you can see that all the so this is the preview for your sample. Okay, so now in this, every function after using every method, you can see the matrix is generated. All the metrics are here, so you can just clicking in any matrix, you can go there and you can find out what are you doing. Okay, now after that we will go for a transformation.
Hello.
So we will, yeah,
Can you repeat the last step that you have to?
yeah, renaming column. Okay, so suppose you can see that in our name of this column is quite large, like LFQ intensity treatment one. So we just want to remove the unnecessary part. So for that, I selected the just go to the this rearrange column, and here you can see that there is a many functions. So you can rename your column by using the particular function. So I have just selected here and removed by using this function. Okay. So this is the preview part. You can see that. So just go to click. So you can see that in the matrix, the other unnecessary files is removed. Okay. Now the next part is to categorize our group. So here you can see that in this file we have the two kind of file. One is the treatment and one is the control. So for so if suppose if you want to delete certain columns, okay. So just select those matrix and you can just delete those matrix. Yeah. So after that, you can just categorize your sample. So we have the two sample here. So we are okay. So we can just rename those columns on the. So we have to go to the annotation row and go to the categorical annotation row. So here you can go to the create and create for experiment frame. So as you see that in our sample there is a I have written so we have the name like 1, 2, 3. So I will just click here and click OK. So now it will give a grouping like so now our sample is grouped in the two part, which is treatment and control. Okay. So now the first initial process, the annotation and all the filtering process is done. So now we will go to the further statistical analysis and transformation. So now we will transform our data by using a log2 transform. So here just going to the basics and clicking the transform, you can transform your data in the 2x or 10x, whatever you want. So basically for proteomics, we basically do the log2 transformation. So we by clicking this, we can just transform our data. And after transformation, you can see how your data is because we also we have to check the what are the number of proteins are represented in sample and what are the distribution of sample. So by using a histogram, we can see the distribution of those all the samples here. So similarly, also the profile plot. So profile plot basically gives the idea about what are the range of those proteins and how their distribution are. And they also give like correlation of a sample. So if you want to see a correlation of a particular sample, so you can do the correlation to each sample. Then also if you want to see the complete correlation matrix, so you can go to the this multi-scatter plot. So here you can see that in multi-scatter plot, you will see all the so all the matrix, and you can just select the any Pearson correlation, or you will get the what are the correlation and what are the values. If you want to export or download, you just click to the PDF export image. You can download all the files. Okay. So after doing the transformation, now we will go for a filtration process. So just before the imputation, you did the filtration process. You kept the 70% criteria, like the missing values. Having a 30% missing value, we only keep those samples only. So for that, we have to go to the filter raw, and we go for the filter raw based on the valid values. So in here you can filter your data by using a number or percentage. So here we have the C sample. So we want only those data which have those features or proteins which have at least two values. So here I will select two, and in the mode we will select in the each group. So we will select the in the each group, and it will be valid that if you want to greater than less than you can choose anyone. So valid is okay, and so after that we will click OK. So you will generate a matrix. Now you can see the total number of proteins right now is 2146, and here after the filtration it's around 1600 proteins. Also, if you want to count what are the total number of proteins in each sample, you can just clicking the uh, uh, this numeric Venn diagram. You are able to see how many proteins are present in the each sample. So this is the basically on the so here you can see that all the samples having almost similar number. So we do not need to remove those samples. So sometimes we have very less number in a particular sample. So we can remove those samples by visualization and by or seeing the number of proteins in particular samples. So now after the filtration, we go for imputation. So this is the imputation. So we impute by using a replace missing value from normal distribution. So in Perseus, they basically impute the data on the basis of normal distribution. So these are the by default parameter you have to. They basically choose the any number on the basis which is near to the standard deviation, and they select which is nearby the mean of a particular Gaussian curve. So this is a by default setting. So you can just go with it. And after the meshing value, you can see how your data look. Again, you can check the histograms and what are the profile plot and the correlations of after the removing the samples. And so if you see, so this is the basically histogram of a distribution of a particular sample in each sample. So you can see that there's a slight skewness in the treatment. So we will go for a normalization, or also we can check the histogram and what are the distribution. So the normalization is so if you take the box plot which is not properly aligned. So for that we need to go for a normalization. So here you can normalize by different ways. So most often we use this around which is subtract by median. So for that we just go there and select the column, pick out we need to normalize each column, and this is the median normalization. So just click OK. So after that, you can just select again the histogram or your profile plot and correlation, and you are able to find what are the differences and what are the changes are occurring. So now you can see that this distribution curve looks okay, and also the profile plot. You can go to the profile plot and you can see the box plot are now properly aligned. So this data is so if you see compared to the MetaboAnalyst, so MetaboAnalyst they have they already decided the few steps you have to click. So here you have to make a proper workflow, and you can easily visualize and you can properly understand your data, and you can use different methods, try and go for a particular analysis. So now after doing all the analysis, you can also we have imputed all the data. You can also check the PC of a particular this sample. So if you see there the two groups are there. So here is a you can different settings are present. So you can check or visualize or plot this PCA plot and by using a different setting. So I'm not going through this right now. So after that we will go for a statistical t-test. So our sample has the two we are using right now the two sample t-test. So this is a basically by default, all the things are by default. So these are the paired samples. So we will click in the paired, and here in the test mode, we will select the Welch t-test, and everything will be by default. And here we use the basically we will use the p-value for a truncation of our t-test t-test of the particular protein. So this apart from that, we can keep the other settings as a by default, and we will just click OK. And we can so after that it will generate one column. So here this is basically where t-test significant between the treatment and control. So it will give a positive sign for those have passed the significant criteria. So now after that getting the significant hit. So this is just we got the proteins which is past the t-test criteria. So getting the significant hint, there's a two mode. One by using the clustering based method. So here So here we everything we have to keep by default. So this is a clustering based method. So here you can see the histogram, but it's we have to do the proper settings. On other way is the manual method. So you can just click on that matrix and go to the volcano plot. And this is so these are the you have to keep by default setting, and you can change this one. Basically, this SO is basically a fold change criteria. So you can change in later. So first we will check here, and you can check here. This is the volcano plot, and if you want to change the fold change criteria, so suppose we want to keep a fold change criteria as a 2, so just click 2 and refresh this area. Now you can see that it rearrange all the this volcano plot and give the matrix according to that. So here now, if you're getting this part, so it will generate one matrix according to that. So what you can do that just you can download this matrix. This is the volcano plot matrix where you will get all the fortune criteria and the significant data path. So basically, it's the complete matrix. So this is a quite after that we have to do the manual thing. So you can just you can download this matrix by clicking, or also go to the save mode or your export mode, or you can just save it by where you want to save. So yeah. So I've already downloaded this file, so I'm just showing how this file looks. So this is the proper file. So it will give this file, and here you will find this significant, which is basically FDR significant proteins, and this is a negative logarithm for the FDR, and this is the difference is basically a log to fold chain, and this is the protein ID, and here you will find the list of all the positive proteins. So I have also already sorted. So you have to do the normal sorting thing. So just select this column and sort A to Z and select all and keep and select all the t-test pass protein. So here I've selected all the t-test pass protein, and after that I have sorted all the columns on the basis of their fold change criteria. So here I kept the fold change criteria. So you can just select this different column and sort A to Z, and you can keep the particular criteria for fold change, which is I'm taking 1.5 for filtering our data. So these are all the down regulated proteins which is have passing the fold change criteria as well as the t-test criteria, and these are the basically up regulated proteins. So around here you can see that around 282 proteins which is passed are basically defensively active protein in this criteria. Yeah. So this is overall. So another part is the clustering based method. So we can show that in the next part, which is the next part is quite complicated. So we can show that part. So yeah. So this is all so all about that. So if you want to use a different normalization technique, if you're not by using a subset normalization, you're not getting the proper modification. And also, if you want to do the phosphorylation method, you can also do that. And here is a different visualization tools. You can use those tools. Then there's a different imputation method. And if you want to impute with the KNN other method, you can directly by using the R programming or Python, you can just input those metrics. So these are here. You can also upload your metrics by using this R, Python, and this thing. So this is all from for today. So for next class, we will go for the further part to do that. Okay. So that's all from my side.
All right, Ramesh.
Yeah.
So Deep, you can just quickly flash the MetaBoNeList once more, and then we can give the files for MetaBoNeList analysis. So again today, whatever Perseus you people have learned, you can take the data file, and you will just have more time to practice that. You'll have the video recording available as well. So some settings, if it was not clear, you can watch that again. There's some very good tutorials available as well online from the same team which made the MaxQuant. They have the Perseus made. All right, so let's have the quick demo of MetaBoNeList, Deep, and then we will have the quiz for today.
Okay, sir. So actually, we have shared the exercise 4 data file only with you, so that at least we can do it together, and you guys can use that particular file only. And this is just a repeat of the session whatever I have took in the last class, and this is just to give you some brush up that we have done in the last class, right? So I will request all of you to use the exercise 4 file that has been shared with you, and I am using the demo file. So you can use the demo file also, but it will be good if you use the exercise 4 file only, whatever has been shared with you right now, so that you, the quiz is based on that one, right? So once again, we are putting the file in the meta-analysis, where you need to click in the peak intensity table. You need to choose samples in column unpaired, and I have told you why we are using it in the last class. And then you have to choose file. The name for you, it will be exercise 4 file, right? Then you will click submit over here. Once you are clicking submit, it will give you the data integrity check, right? And the data integrity check will give you an idea of the so it is taking some time. So it will give you an idea of the data that how the data is actually looking. For example, like this. So you can see over here there are a total of 19% missing values are there, and this 19% missing values need to be filtered and also need to be estimated, right? So over here, as I have told, that we need to make sure that we are not giving much relaxed parameters, so that because the missing increase of the missing value will decrease the actualness of the data. So that is the reason we will keep here 30%. That means any data, any features which are having more than 30% of the missing value will get filtered out. And over here, we are using KNN feature wise. We will talk more about the missing value part in the next class, but KNN feature wise is nothing but the imputation estimation based on KNN algorithm, where K denotes the number of neighbors. Okay, so that and we will talk more about that, but just remember that K means of the KNN means number of neighbors, and we'll process this. So once we have processed, you can see that the normalization has been done. But from where you will know that how much features are left and what is the normalization, what is the number of missing value filtered data has came. So you can go to the downloads option, and over here there is a process data.csv. So if you are clicking over here, and it's based to like save link as, so save link as and save wherever you want. For example, if I'm saving it in the download, and then I'm opening it. So you will find that the total number of proteins or features which were somewhere around 2000 plus has been reduced to 1341. That means those number of features were having missing value more than 30%, which has been removed initially, right? So then we can again go back to the data filtration part, where we are proceeding it without filtering any further data. And for this particular data set, we are using normalization by median and log transformation. But as Avinash told, there are multiple different strategies up there. But for this particular data set, we will go ahead with the normalization and missing value imputation also. So as you can see, after normalization, the sample wise view is pretty good, because the central tendencies are over here are same and aligned, right? And as we can see that we are doing here normalization. So we need to also keep in mind that as the normalization, the data is normalized. That means we have an idea of the parameter of the population mean. That means the statistical test that we'll choose in future will be all parametric tests, right? For student t-test or Wales t-test. And if the data would have not been normalized, then we will be using for the any non-parametric test, for example, Mann-Whitney U test or Wilcoxon rank sum test. Why? Because during that time, we're not aware of the parameter of the population mean of the central tendency, right? So we will talk about all these concepts in the next class much more broadly. So once this is done, we will go to the PCA, and we will try to see that how the PCA is looking. And as you are aware that PCA is based on the variation of the data according to the classes, on the basis of the variation it assigns, right? Because it's the clustering algorithm. And as you can see, there is the PC1, PC1 is 42%, PC2 is 19.7%. So total the variation in this particular PC1 and PC2 is somewhere around more than 60%, somewhere around 64%, right? So this is for one concept, and I think you guys are aware about this concept. Then the second concept will be the statistical test that I have showed, and instead of going to fold chain t-test, I will go directly to Volcano plot, right? And this is the total number of 0.05 and by the p-value threshold and the tumor versus control, and the group variance will be unequal for this, and submitting the thing. So somewhere around 103 significant down and 81. So I think all other things I have already discussed is just a brush up of the steps, and we will talk more about each of the concept, why we are using these, what is the statistical parameter, missing value imputation in the next class, right? So on the basis of that, I think we can have the quiz where you will be using the exercise 4 data set that has been allotted to you, right? I think, sir, we can share the quiz and they can have the quiz.
All right, so let's start the quiz now. And they have already done this type of analysis once last time, so they should be comfortable now. And the quiz questions will be based on this analysis as well as few general concepts which we have talked today. That's all. So when you are done with the quiz, you can leave that time. Thank you, everyone.